will be fully honoured. And why do we have to wait until the end of this month for details on Northern Ireland to be published? It's all very well, Mr Speaker, announcing a multi-million-pound advertising campaign, but if the right honourable gentleman can't persuade his bestest friend in Cabinet that everything is going according to plan, then it's hardly surprising that the country is anxious and confused. A month ago, the Prime Minister said that there was no reason a deal could not be reached by the end of this month. Can the Minister update us where we are in terms of being on track to meet that deadline, with a deal agreed in the next fortnight? The Government has previously estimated that there will be up to 400 million customs declarations per year. HMRC said that they would cost £32 each, adding up to a staggering £12.8 billion bill for business. Does the Minister have any updated assessment of those numbers and the cost to UK firms? It is also reported that HMRC are not planning to test the systems until November, a handful of weeks before they are needed. Could the Minister explain why those checks are not taking place sooner? And would the Minister outline what recent engagement the Government has had with Scottish and Welsh Governments on state aid policy prior to the announcements today? Over half of UK trade will experience greater delays, costs and barriers. So what percentage of UK trade, can I ask the Minister, will enjoy easier trading terms on the 1st of January next year? Mr Speaker, the best way to help all businesses to prepare is, of course, to agree a deal with the European Union on the terms we were told to expect. That means no fees, charges, tariffs or quantitative restrictions across all sectors. It does not mean, as we had in the statement today, customs, physical checks, export declarations, a commodity code, an economic operator restrictions and identification. And it certainly doesn't mean a living document with guidance that changes day by day. Mr Speaker, I'm sure the Minister will agree with me that we should never make promises that we cannot keep. So will the Minister guarantee that the promises made to UK businesses and workers in the Conservative Party manifesto in December last year will be honoured, because they are not consistent with the statement that he has delivered this afternoon? Last week, the Chancellor of the Exchequer stood at that dispatch box and said that he would do all he can to support British business. Today, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster stands at that same dispatch box and is wrapping those businesses in red tape and sending them to a supersized lorry park in Dover. For the sake of all workers worried about their jobs and all business owners anxious about their future, we need the government to get this right. I am not convinced that today's statement does that.
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her questions and also for her commitment to working collaboratively in order to ensure that we get the best possible deal in our negotiations with the European Union. And it is the case that progress has been made. Still, there are significant differences between ourselves and the European Union, but I did think it was significant and welcome that, for example, in the Joint Committee, Maroš Šefčovič, the Vice President, conceded that it wouldn't be no longer appropriate for the EU to have an office in Northern Ireland, an example of the flexibility which I know Michel Barnier and others are applying in the broader negotiations, and I will seek to update the House on progress in those negotiations at an appropriate time. She asks about the compliance of our approach with our legal obligations under the WTO. We're absolutely certain, we've taken legal advice, that we are compliant, and indeed Lars Carlson, a customs expert who appeared in front of the Select Committee on the future relationship with the European Union recently, said that the issue raised was not a problem. There is no violation of international customs principles. The international legislation that the UK is part of under the WTO is not violated, and of course it will be removed, the correct process that we're taking, on the 1st of July. She asks about infrastructure at EU-facing ports. I should stress that there are no plans to build a new lorry park at Dover, and indeed the Chief Executive of the Port of Dover, Tim Reardon, said that it, again, to the Right Honourable Gentleman's Select Committee, it's fair to say that traders are likely to be ready. The paperwork required to go into and out of France, those requirements have been set out very clearly for some time now. The Honourable Lady also asked about the danger of lost tariffs. There's no danger of lost tariffs. Every importer will have to pay tariffs. We're simply making sure that that process is staged. And it is also important to stress, as a number of those involved in the haulage industry and in the freight industry have emphasised that this phased approach is a sensible and pragmatic way of ensuring that we can be in a stronger position. She asked about the situation in Northern Ireland. Is it the case that the EU tariff is the default? No, it is not. And she also asks about state aid. State aid, subsidy control, support for businesses is important, but it is also a reserved matter. Finally, I'd just like to quote from, again, the Chief Executive of the Port of Dover, because the Honourable Lady understandably is anxious to ensure that business has all the opportunities that we would want to see in the COVID recovery. The Chief Executive of the Port of Dover said, being outside the EU customs code puts the UK in a position where it can develop processes that suit the UK in the 21st century. We do not need to stick to a legacy customs process whose origin can be found in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle in the year 789. It's time that we modernised our border, time that we took back control, and that is what today's announcement will do.
Sir Berlinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement, and that I've just stepped out of a meeting with the British Chamber of Commerce, and they're very much welcoming the acceleration in implementation, investment and certainty for British business, though they want as much of that as quickly as possible. Can I just ask for clarification on two rather technical matters, and I'm going to choose my words rather carefully. First, that as long as the Joint Committee is satisfied that movement of goods in transit from GB to Northern Ireland are not at risk of travelling onto the Republic of Ireland, while there may need to be some data transfer, there will be no need for a full import customs declaration to cross from GB to Northern Ireland. And secondly, now that the implementation of the final UK-EU border is going to be effectively phased to July 2021, and this could violate WTO rules, that there will be legal certainty that there will be no extension beyond July 2021, and that Parliament can provide that legal certainty in UK primary legislation if it's required.
Chancellor of the Duchy.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Chair of the Liaison Committee, for his thoughtful and detailed questions. On the first, which relates, of course, to the Northern Ireland Protocol, it is the case that there will need to be the provision of certain information in order to ensure that the UK plays its part in the implementation of the protocol in helping to protect the EU's single market, and we will be saying more about that later this month. On the point about the phased implementation of controls, we're entirely satisfied that that's compliant with WTO procedures, but he's right to stress that that's because it is a temporary regime, and we will ensure that there is no alteration to the timetable that we've set out.
SNP spokesperson Pete Wishart.
Well, here we are, Mr. Speaker, the end game of the disastrous and tortuous Brexit, all summed up neatly in a not too catchy slogan of "Let's get going." Dominic Cummings must have been up all night thinking of that one. We are now to have an economic downturn precipitated by COVID, compounded by their hard Brexit. It doesn't matter the chaos that Brexit will bring, it doesn't matter the damage it will inflict on the economy, the decimation of key sectors, the chaos at borders, the threat to livelihoods. All of this supremely inconsequential for all of these anti-EU obsessive. Let's get going, says the Chancellor of the Duchy, and we in Scotland intend to take him exactly at his word. Maybe not quite in the way that he intended, because we fully intend to get going from their disastrous Brexit Britain. 54% of the Scottish people now support Scottish independence. 54%. That support is only going to go up. And for the Tories, all they can now try to do is to impose their will on a recalcitrant Scotland. Their latest squeeze, of course, is to curb devolution, to attack the powers of the Scottish Parliament, to impose a UK single market on a Scotland wanting out of their UK. This, my Brexiteer friends, is the new UK superstate. Remember that word, superstate, and all of its nightmarish controlling horror as you so chillingly but wrongly assigned to the European Union. The superstate is arriving for Scotland, but it's not wearing gold stars on blue, it is wearing a Union Jack. And all this will do is to turn that trickle of Remainers that are now supporting independence to a full-going flood. All I can say to the right honourable gentleman is we won't be participating in this new UK single market, making it work or implementing it. The only thing we'll be doing with it is using it as a recruiting sergeant for more people to independence. I suppose he's now got two choices when it comes to Scottish independence. He could do it easily and conveniently in partnership with us, or he could draw it out in a useless, self-defeating process of attrition. Either way, we win. Enjoy your Brexit, my Conservative friends. We will be coming with you. You may be getting going from the EU, but is it right that we are getting going from the UK?
Well, it's always a pleasure to see the honourable gentleman. And it's particularly good to see him in his place here in the chamber. I have to say that is a particularly brave move, given the comments of the First Minister of Scotland over the course of the weekend, because it may well be the case, if as rumoured, that quarantine regulations mean that people can't move from England to Scotland, that he'll be imprisoned in this place for far longer than he ever anticipated. But I for one, will be cheering because I so enjoy his company. The honourable gentleman, as is his wont and as is his right, chose to skate lightly over the detail in his response, but nevertheless he made a number of important points. He suggested that as a result of our departure from the European Union, we would be curbing devolution. That's not the case. It is the case that there are more than 100 powers that return to the Scottish Parliament as a result of our leaving the European Union. Far from being a power grab, it is a power surge for all of the parliaments of the United Kingdom. He also made the point that, which we know that it's the Scottish National Party's policy to leave the UK, but then to join the European Union, which would mean that all of those powers that flow to the Scottish Parliament would be returned to Brussels, including, of course, the return of Scotland's capacity to regulate its own fishing waters to the EU as Scotland was shackled to the common fisheries policy. So the SNP's position, curiously, is to demand fewer powers for the Scottish Parliament and more powers for the European Commission. Not, I think, a popular view in Fraserburgh. And then the final thing that I would say is that the honourable gentleman, of course, talked about our proposals, which are designed to ensure that Scotland's businesses and Scotland's citizens can continue to sell their goods and their services into the rest of the UK. He, instead of welcoming that collaborative working, talked about these policies being a recruiting sergeant for independence. I would say that the mask slipped, but indeed he's never worn a mask to hide his intentions. He's a separatist, he's a nationalist. I love him dearly, but as long as he cleaves to that ideology, then I'm afraid we have to recognise that he's in the wrong boat.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The people of Rhondda Valley voted overwhelmingly for Brexit 4 years ago, yet still we are here. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the public wants to hear more of the opportunities that come leaving the European Union, and rather than the scaremongering and doing down a country that we keep hearing from the ventures opposite?
Chancellor to Dutchy.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very good point. It was the democratic decision of the whole United Kingdom to leave the European Union. There are significant opportunities, and one of the points that I alluded to in my statement is that as businesses prepare for the export requirements that will be needed when we're outside the customs union, it is also the case that that equips them all the more powerfully for the new trading opportunities that exist across the globe.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much. Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. The right honourable gentleman says he's not intending to create a massive concrete lorry park in Ashford. I just gently point out that if the lorries arriving there don't park up and stop, it'll be very hard for people to check their paperwork, so the lorries will be parking. But can he clarify something about this site? Will it just be for lorries leaving the UK to check that they have the right paperwork so they don't clog up the system at Dover and in Calais? Or will it be for checks on goods coming into the UK in lorries, or both? And will it be operational along with the goods vehicle movement service IT system by the end of this year?
Chancellor.
Well, I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman because it gives me a chance to clarify a number of points. The honourable lady suggested that we would be building a lorry park at Dover. As the honourable gentleman points out, we're specifically moving infrastructure away from the port. And as the chief executive of as the Chief Executive of the Port of Dover, Tim Reardon, pointed out, indeed to his own committee, one of the most helpful things that came out of the government's announcement was the commitment to construct new control infrastructure away from the port, away from the key pinch point. And combined with the GVMS system, to which he alludes, this will ensure that we have the free flow of freight, none of the anticipated problems that have been mentioned, and as a result, this investment in infrastructure will ensure that we can have lorries moving out of the UK to the EU with our high-quality goods.
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very glad that my right honourable friend is responsible for this with his acknowledged administrative flair. And I want to raise with him an esoteric point which has been raised by constituents consistently, and it is this. What is going to replace the regime which has so successfully allowed our constituents to travel in their thousands with their dogs across the Channel? Will he try to ensure that the existing pet passport arrangement for dogs and other pets is able to continue after the end of this year?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, my right honourable friend makes an important point. I should say that my right honourable friend, like me and like many of his constituents, is a proud dog owner. Scarlett Mitchell is, I think, a previous winner of the Westminster Dog of the Year competition. But seriously, it is the case that people cherish the opportunity to travel with their pets. If we are not a listed country, then there will be additional procedures that individual pet owners will have to follow beyond those which currently exist. But we're confident that we will be a listed country because we have none of the health risks here in the UK that those countries which are not listed by the EU have. So I'm confident that, that he and Scarlett, who's a beautiful Mitchell, which I believe is the full name of his pet, will be able to continue to visit France.
We now go to Barry Shearman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I inform the Secretary of State that as a member of the Select Committee on Leaving Europe and the future relationship with Europe, I find it rather negative of him to take out of context some of the quotes from the witnesses that have given evidence to the committee. I've heard all the evidence since I've been a member, and I have to tell him that my view is we're heading for a disaster. And what does he say? For a leading businessman in my constituency, he said, we're staggering because of coronavirus, out of coming out of the ring, having gone 15 rounds with Anthony Joshua, only to find, as we leave this chaos of leaving Europe, we've got Tyson Fury for another 15. Is it fair to do this to our great British public?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Seconds out round one, I'm tempted to reply. But the honourable gentleman, the right honourable gentleman, knows that I have great affection and respect for him. And indeed, it was his questioning at the Select Committee that helped elucidate some of the opportunities that leaving the European Union can bring. The customs expert Lars Carlson, whom I mentioned earlier, who spoke before the committee, talked about leaving the European Union being a great opportunity, because part of the UK strategy and global vision for trade opens up totally new industries here which can be more efficient and bring additional benefits to British business. So I think it's important, of course, to be aware of the challenges, but also the opportunities.
Julian Smith.
And Deputy Speaker, with so many of our small and UK-wide businesses struggling to survive following the COVID crisis, the idea of adding additional friction and cost to the trading relationship with their biggest market is really and deeply problematic and worrying. My right honourable friend has worked extremely hard for the country over the past few months, but can I urge him and request of him to do everything he can to ensure that the UK gets a deal with minimal tariffs and minimal friction?
Can I again thank my right honourable friend for the role that he played in reconstituting the Northern Ireland Executive earlier this year, which has made the whole process, of course, of agreeing the approach towards the Northern Ireland Protocol and safeguarding the rights of Northern Ireland citizens significantly easier. And I think we should all be grateful for his leadership in that role, which helped advance the cause of peace. I should say that on the specific point about securing a comprehensive free trade agreement with the European Union, I'm completely with him. I think that it would be better for us to have, as the Honourable Lady also mentioned, the zero tariff, zero quota approach that we can secure through a comprehensive FTA. But I should add that whether or not we secure that FTA, many of the steps that I've outlined today will be required by business as no regrets steps anyway.
We now go to James Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At the end of March, I was told by the Health Minister, the Honourable Member for Mid-Bedfordshire, that any European Union centrally authorised COVID-19 vaccine would be authorised in the UK during the transition period, and that the government was working to ensure that UK patients can access the best and most innovative medicines beyond the 31st of December 2020. Can the Minister now guarantee that whatever else changes at the end of this year, there will be no risk of any delay after 31st of December in the UK acquiring a COVID-19 vaccine in comparison to countries in the EU?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his question. It is the case that there is global collaboration through the CEPI programme in order to try to ensure that all countries who are determined to deal with the COVID-19 threat can work together in order to develop a vaccine. And we have relationships with European and other nations which are there to ensure that we're in a strong position to be able to provide a vaccine for our citizens once one is effectively tested.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Buckinghamshire has more micro-businesses than any other county in the country. What steps is my right honourable friend taking to ensure that these very smallest firms are fully aware of the steps that they will need to take so that they really can get going with the new opportunities they will enjoy after the transition period?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point. In Buckinghamshire and elsewhere where there are micro-businesses, they can take advantage of the new information campaign that we provided. There is an online checker which will allow them to judge whether or not they have taken the steps appropriate in order to be ready to trade. They can also register for regular updates in order to ensure that they are making progress in a timely fashion. And of course the provision of additional funding for customs intermediaries will also ensure that they can have an appropriate freight forwarder or other in order to ensure that they can continue to trade freely.
We now go to Alison Thewlis.
Thank you very much. It's perfectly clear from his statement that what's actually happening here is we're going to get more red tape rather than less, and additional cost and risk to employers, especially those who employ EU nationals, as they will have to register as EU sponsors, as Home Office sponsors for the first time. Can you tell me how much that will cost to businesses up and down the UK? And does he agree with me that it's Scotland that is changing and going with 54% of people now supporting independence?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, it is the case that Scotland will benefit as, she talks about migration, Scotland will benefit as the whole of the UK will from a points-based system that ensures that we can have top scientists in Scottish universities and gifted clinicians in Scotland's superb hospitals. She also refers to an opinion poll. Well, of course it is the case that we had a vote on whether or not Scotland should be independent in 2014. As it happens, slightly more than 54% of people voted for the United Kingdom to stay together and to be stronger together. We were told that was a once-in-a-generation vote, and I know that that promise will be honoured.
Damien Green.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend may be aware that I consider the decision to put an outbound emergency lorry park in my constituency near where several thousand new homes are being built on one side and with a large hospital nearby on the other side to be wrong-headed. Can he confirm that when the Transport Minister writes to me that it is not the government's plan to develop this area as a permanent lorry park, that that is indeed government policy? And can he let the House know what environmental impact assessment has been done for the site?
I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman who does a brilliant job in standing up for his constituents. It is not the case that any specific site has been absolutely confirmed. We're in commercial negotiations with a number of sites, and as and when they are confirmed, I will let him know. It is also the case that, as he quite rightly points out, that some of the infrastructure will be temporary, some will be permanent. But can I extend to him and to all Kent members of Parliament an opportunity to come into the Cabinet Office to discuss with me and officials the approach that we're taking, and I hope I can provide him and other colleagues with reassurance in that process.
West Streeting.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's 5.5 months to go, and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster still can't even confirm the site. I wonder if he could at least reply to the question asked by my right honourable friend, the member for Leeds Central, who asked specifically about what kind of checks would be taking place at the lorry park, whether it was goods moving to the European continent or coming into the UK. But he also asked, and I think this is goes to the heart of the concern we've just heard in reply to the previous question, whether it will be operational along with the Goods Vehicle Movement Service IT system by the end of the year. Can he at least give us that assurance?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his point. It is the case that the GVMS is going to be in place, as all systems are, so that we can have a fully operational border. And it is, of course, the case that the additional infrastructure, the £705 million we've announced today, will ensure that it is in place in time. That additional infrastructure is there specifically in order to ensure that when vehicles arrive in Calais, that they have passed through all the necessary checks and then they can proceed smoothly to market.
Mark Pawsey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many businesses in Rugby trade with companies across Europe, and I wonder, therefore, what assessment the Minister has made of their current state of readiness for the end of the transition period. And I wonder if he could say a little more about the steps he's taking to ensure that retaining and growing that business becomes easier rather than more difficult.
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point. It is the case that a significant number of businesses have taken significant steps in order to prepare themselves for life outside the customs union and the single market. But one of the reasons for the campaign that we're launching now is in order to ensure that every business has the information that it needs, and I hope to work with my honourable friend and other honourable members in order to ensure that business has the support that it needs to take advantage of the opportunities and also to deal with the changes that are coming.
Nick Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. But it was only yesterday that the government announced £100 million to develop HMRC systems to reduce the burden on traders. Why haven't these systems already been developed?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, they have. We're just improving them.
Stephen Farry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today's statement sets out the brutal reality of Brexit on the GB to European Union interface, but doesn't address Northern Ireland. We don't have the luxury of a phased rollout. This has to be in place for the 1st of January. So can the Chancellor give us a firm commitment today that there will be at least the same level of details we published today for the Northern Ireland Protocol before the end of this month, given that we have at least 5 different regulatory checks that have to be put in place?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for drawing an appropriate distinction between the border operating model between GB and EU and the Northern Ireland Protocol, and it will be the case that more detail will be published later this month, and indeed the specialised committee is meeting later this week in order to refine that.
Tom Randall.
Mr. Speaker, at the weekend, the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster said these measures were too little, too late. But is it not the case we would have left the EU earlier and with less uncertainty had it not been for the attempts of those opposite to dither and delay and postpone our exit from the European Union and denying the will of the people of Gedling and the will of the British people?
There should be questions to him.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very fair point. I exempt the honourable lady from any criticism, but it is the case that while she might have wanted more spending on infrastructure, one of the things that her party was committed to right up until the general election was staying in the customs union and in the single market. So it was Labour policy then not to spend this money at all, not to implement this programme at all. But as I say, I exempt the honourable lady from any particular criticism because I know that she's committed, like I am, to doing the best for British business.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In today's statement, the Chancellor of the Duchy has acknowledged some of the costs and attempted to highlight the opportunities of Brexit. But opportunities in financial terms currently equate to zero. Those who said leaving the EU would mean additional costs and bureaucracy were right. One of these costs are now becoming clear: more money on top of the £100 million previously spent on comms and now £705 million on border infrastructure. No frictionless trade after all. So when will the government be in a position to respond to the 50 questions raised today by the Food and Drink Federation, particularly the how?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable lady, and it will be the case that I and my colleague, the Secretary of State for DEFRA, will respond to the Food and Drink Federation's helpful questions. The FDF has been a valued partner in our preparation for our departure from the European Union, and I'd like to pay tribute to Ian Wright and all those who work for the Food and Drink Federation in making sure that they work with us in order to provide every part of the supply chain with the information it needs.
Justin Madders.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. By my reckoning, the grant being offered to the customs intermediary sector will probably cover the costs of the customs officers that will be needed for about a couple of weeks. So what estimate has he made of the annual cost to UK businesses of complying with these new customs rules?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
If I can gently correct the honourable gentleman, it's not the case that the grant is there for customs officers, not the case that it's there for HMRC staff or Border Force staff. The £84 million is there for customs intermediaries who are commercial actors, and as was pointed out in the quotations that I used earlier, this is a significant opportunity for the UK to grow rather than retreat.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've been speaking to local business bosses recently who are very much looking forward to having the opportunity to trade freely with the rest of the world. With that in mind, can my right honourable friend confirm what support will be available for those individual businesses following the launch of the Check, Change and Go campaign?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, my old friend is absolutely right. There will be significant new opportunities, and as businesses prepare for life outside the customs union, with the help and the support that we're announcing today, that will equip them more easily to take advantage of global trade opportunities as well, and we will make sure that there are a field force of appropriate advisors to supplement the online checker, which I know he and I will bring to the attention of the businesses in our constituency.
David Linden.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. In this latest kind of Brexit bingo readout that the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster presented to the House today, he wants to talk about optimism and opportunity. But can I press him on a point that's not in the statement which relates specifically to the Erasmus scheme? Many young people at Loch End High School and Easterhouse were able to take part in the Erasmus scheme. Going forward, as we head 5.5 months away, what kind of hope, what opportunity can you offer them? Or is it a case of this Tory government are taking away that opportunity?
The Duchy.
Well, it is the case that after consultation indeed with devolved administrations, we're negotiating to seek a potential continuation of involvement in the Erasmus scheme, as we are seeking to continue participation in scientific collaboration as well. But one of the things that I would say about the fate of children in Easterhouse and in other parts of Glasgow is that their life chances have fallen backwards relative to other parts of the United Kingdom as a result of the education policies that the Scottish Government have put in place. It used to be the case that Scotland was ahead of England in international league tables for reading, writing and mathematics. It's now the case that Scotland has fallen behind, and the response of the Scottish Government has been no longer to participate in some of those international comparisons. Hiding from scrutiny is no way to help Scotland's children.
Nikki.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Government invests in new border and control infrastructure to ensure that we can continue to trade smoothly with the EU once we go beyond the transition period, would my right honourable friend agree with me that this will create more local jobs to support ports such as Grimsby and Immingham?
Yes, my honourable friend is absolutely right. It is the case Grimsby and Immingham are hugely important ports, not just for EU but for rest of the world trade. And as I mentioned earlier in quoting from the authoritative figures who appeared in front of the future relationship with the European Union Select Committee, there are significant opportunities for people to play a role in the expansion of international trade. These are new jobs which are designed to make sure that Britain goes global.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last September, the Minister acknowledged there is a material risk of long delays at Dover. Will he tell us what his current assessment of that risk is? The Freight Transport Association pointed out there are only 300 spaces in the lorry park at Calais, where thousands of lorries coming from Dover are likely to be checked every day. Is he now proposing that all 10,000 lorries heading for Dover will be checked somewhere in the UK before they arrive there? How many officials will it require to carry out those checks? And will he tell us the short list of the locations where those checks might be carried out?
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for referring back to the time when, of course, I appeared in front of a Select Committee chaired by the member for Leeds Central. The situation has changed since then. And it has changed as a result of the investment that we've put into infrastructure and the refinement of systems and greater clarity. And I should say that I quoted earlier the Chief Executive of the Port of Dover, Tim Reardon, and he said of hauliers, it is fair to say they are likely to be ready because the requirements that they have to fulfil have been set out very clearly for some time now. So I'm confident that the steps that we've already taken and the announcement that we're making today will help ensure the free flow of trade.
Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In my constituency of Unismorn, I have Holyhead Port, which has the second busiest roll-on-roll port in the UK. We've seen investment in Dover. How can my right honourable friend assure me that the freight in Holyhead will be checked? And what does this mean for jobs, skilled employment and investment that is so desperately needed in Anismore?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for reminding us of the vital role that the port of Holyhead in Anglesey plays. I had the opportunity to visit Holyhead last summer to see the superb work that was being undertaken by her constituents, and I can assure her that whether it's trade with the Republic of Ireland or beyond, we will do everything we can, working, of course, with the Welsh Government in order to ensure that the commercial opportunities for those in Holyhead who do so much for our trade are enhanced.
We now go to Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Vauxhall and the workers who keep it going are fundamental to Luton's economy, and a third shift of workers are starting so they can meet the high demand for our tremendous Luton-made vans. However, without a tariff-free trade agreement, future investment is uncertain for manufacturing across the country. Without sound bites or slogans, what genuine progress has been made towards a trade deal that protects the future of car manufacturing in the UK?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, the Honourable Lady does make a very important point, and it is the case that the success of the automotive sector, not just in Luton but in Sunderland and across the United Kingdom, is a matter of importance to people across this House, and that's why we're pursuing a zero tariff, zero quota arrangement. It is, of course, the case, as she will know, that there has been significant onshoring of capacity from other European countries into the UK, not least in Sunderland, and that is something that we want to build on. But I will do everything I can in order to ensure that she and other MPs who represent constituencies with significant automotive interests are kept informed about the progress of our negotiations, because, of course, we put the interests of her constituents first.
We now go to Peter Bone.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I thank the Secretary of State for coming to the House and updating us, and as he always does on a regular basis. I wonder if he's had an opportunity to see the report today published by the Centre for Social Justice, entitled "It Still Happens Here, Fighting Slavery in the 2020s, which estimates there are 100,000 modern-day slaves in this country, which has been made a lot easier to achieve by the evil human trafficking gangs by allowing free movement of people. Could he confirm to the House from the 1st of January we'll take back control of our borders, and one of the huge benefits will be able to clamp down on these evil gangs?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, I'm really grateful to my honourable friend for raising this issue. All the time in this House, he's been a consistent opponent of modern slavery and human trafficking, and has done an enormous amount to draw it to the attention of others and to demand and to secure appropriate action. So I think it's only right that members across the House recognise the consistent campaigning energy he's brought to this important issue. I think it's also important to say that as we do take back control of our borders, and indeed as we move to having greater data and a more effective approach towards monitoring who and what comes into this country, then we can play an even more prominent part in dealing with this evil trade.
We now go to Alan Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There's no amount of sound bites or slogans can distract from the fact that Brexit, which I regret, has already made a lot of people poorer. That'll only continue. A very concrete example. A married couple in Stirling, my constituency, in their early 70s, in order to, from January, replicate the European health insurance card, which they're losing against their will need to pay £166.22 per month to replicate what they already have. Would the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster like to come to Stirling and explain to them how their freedom and opportunity to pay more money to replicate what they already have makes their life better?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman who is a distinguished member of the European Parliament for raising that case. I'd be more than happy to come to Stirling. I'm more than happy to receive additional information about the specific case that faces his constituents. Again, it would be my pleasure to do everything I can to ensure that we can resolve the system. On the basis of what he says, I think there may be some miscommunication, but let me commit now to doing my very best in order to resolve the situation on behalf of his constituents.
We now go to Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When we leave the EU, we will no longer be subject to the OJEU, and the public sector procurement contracts, as he knows, are now worth around £250 billion per year. So will my right honourable friend change public sector procurement rules to ensure that any large private company bidding for a public sector contract must have an apprenticeship commitment guaranteeing a certain proportion of its workforce as apprentices?
Chancellor.
Well, my right honourable friend makes a very, very important point. He's absolutely right. Outside the European Union, we can shape our own procurement rules in our own interests. He's also right as well that we should do everything possible to encourage the wider spread of apprenticeships, which do so much to improve social mobility and indeed the effectiveness of British manufacturing. I will look in detail at his specific proposal and see what we can do.
Now go to Harold Williams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Further to the earlier question on Holyhead, how much of the £705 million will be going specifically to that port? And in Holyhead, to what purpose?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, I will be able to provide a breakdown port by port and region by region in due course, but of course we want to work with the Welsh Government in order to ensure that we can make sure, not just in Holyhead, but in other ports in Wales, that appropriate infrastructure is in place. And I'm grateful for the Plaid Cymru endorsement of UK Government spending in Wales in order to strengthen our union.
Paul Bristow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my right honourable friend recall that last year some members opposite were clambering aboard the Eurostar to tell the Commission not to agree a deal? We left with a deal despite what they said and despite their best efforts to block it. Does he agree that we will end the transition period on good terms at the end of the year, despite what some have been saying throughout this process?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. As I said earlier, I exempt the honourable lady from any criticism on this, but there were some members of other parties who did seek to work with the Commission against the interests of this country. And the country decided what it thought of that on the 12th of December last year.
We now go to Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. With the threat of no-deal Brexit last year, drug stockpiles were established to reduce the risk of shortages, particularly of insulin, which is largely imported from the EU. So what state are these stockpiles in now? And if businesses are struggling to prepare for Brexit in the middle of the COVID crisis, how does he expect healthcare services to manage?
Chancellor of the Duchy.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable lady for making that point. As the whole House knows, she's a very distinguished NHS consultant, and she's absolutely right to raise the question of insulin, along with other drugs and other medical devices that we need. And it is the case that the Secretary of State for Health and his department are working with mine in order to ensure that we have stockpiles for any eventuality. But I'll look forward to updating her with the help of my right honourable friend in due course.
Mark Harper.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I listened carefully to all the questions that were coming from the other side, talking about paperwork and checks. When my right honourable friend is talking about these issues, can he remind the public that actually more than half of our trade comes from outside the European Union? Data is transferred electronically, so there's very little paper, and we only check things where there is a risk to our border. We don't open every vehicle, and we're not going to do that in the future.
Well, my right honourable friend makes an excellent point. He's right. It is sometimes the case that some who comment on these matters take a view of customs procedures which is, how can I put it, an antiquated one, which suggests that every single consignment is opened by a uniformed figure who pokes around for hours on end, when in fact it is a streamlined electronic process, and one which, as he quite rightly points out, has also seen the share of trade that the UK has with the rest of the world grow and the share of trade with the EU diminish, even while we were in the single market. And the changes that we are making will provide us with an opportunity to be even more effectively integrated with the growing economies of the world.
We now go to Kenny McCaskill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Scots were told that remaining in the Union and Brexit would assure Scotland of a powerful voice in the world, whilst independence would mean being a small nation and without influence like Ireland. Now that Ireland has a seat in the UN Security Council, President of the Eurogroup, Chief Economist of the ECB and EU Trade Commissioner, can the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster tell me where's Scotland's powerful equivalent?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, who of course was a very distinguished minister in a previous Scottish government. I'll take nothing away from the achievements of the people of the Republic of Ireland, led as they are by their new Taoiseach Michael Martin, and they can look confidently to the future. But it is a fact that were it to be the case that the policies that he advocates were to be taken forward, then we would find that there was a border control at Berwick. You couldn't use the pound sterling in sterling, and it would be the case that as a result there would be economic turbulence for the people who I know are closest to his heart. And that's why I believe that we are stronger and better together. And it is the case, of course, that as a result of having talented advocates like him in this Westminster Parliament, we can achieve more for all parts of the United Kingdom.
Gareth Johnson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK leaving the European Union provides some fantastic opportunities for this country. Inevitably, though, as we leave the European Union, there will be new procedures used at the port of Dover. Can I ask my right honourable friend, therefore, what plans the government put into place in order to communicate with foreign lorry drivers going through Kent to ensure that there is no excessive delay for those drivers doing so?
Well, Honourable Friend makes an important point, and part of the information campaign that we're launching today, as well as being aimed at UK businesses, is also aimed at businesses in the European Union to make sure that they're aware of what they need to do, and awareness is high.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister answer concerned residents living near the site of the lorry park in Kent who will want to know if an assessment of noise and air pollution will be published?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it is the case that there are a number of potential sites in Kent, and we will make sure that whichever site is chosen, that the appropriate procedures are followed in order to safeguard not just the commercial life of the nation, but also the interests of nearby residents.
Richard Graham.
Madam Deputy Speaker, last year the previous head of HMRC said that less than half of the 130,000 UK businesses only exporting to the EU had engaged on likely changes. While understandable then, it's vital that changes now. So while my right honourable friend strives to deliver the comprehensive free trade agreement that everyone on both sides of the English Channel needs, will he also mobilise the army of British Chambers of Commerce, the FSB, growth hubs and other organisations to make sure that their seminars are planned as soon as possible with frequently answered questions, so that when on January the 1st the rules change, our many exporting small businesses do not find this a surprise?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. I should say, of course, that he's been a very effective advocate for Britain's global trading future, making sure that rising economies in East Asia have the opportunity of working well with UK businesses. He is also right that we need to work together, government, business representative organisations and others, in order to ensure that businesses are prepared. He's right, we do want a comprehensive free trade agreement with the EU, but whether or not we secure that agreement or not, outside the customs union, we will need to adapt to a new approach, and we need to work together in order to ensure we can do that properly.
Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was asked by a friend yesterday why I wanted to be a Conservative MP. My answer was very simply empowerment. I've always felt that this side of the House is all about giving people the tools and choices to make their own lives better. I wonder, would my right honourable friend agree that after all of the predictions of doom, blatant scaremongering from the opposition parties that we're sadly still seeing here today, that it's this word of empowerment that's key to the UK to forge a positive way in the world, upon which we must be completely focused on all sides of this House and in every nation of our union?
Well, I completely agree with my honourable friend. It is the case, of course, as we know, that a majority of people in Wales voted to leave the European Union. They did so as part of a United Kingdom because they believed that it was important that more powers flow to this Parliament, as they will also flow to the devolved administrations, so that those who represent them are empowered to take decisions in their name. May I say that when his friend asked him why he wanted to be a Conservative MP, can I say that I'm very glad that he did choose to become a Conservative MP. He is a huge asset to this House. I have to say, though, if anyone who asked me why I became a Conservative MP, I think that, I can return and reply to the House in due course in exactly why. All I would say is it's a pleasure to be on the same benches as the Honourable Gentleman.
Final question, Rosie Duffield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm greatly concerned, as are very many of my constituents, that the lorry park announced in the newspapers will cause serious tailbacks, another summer of traffic chaos and particular problems for those travelling to the nearest A&E department at William Harvey Hospital. Can the Minister assure me that this issue and that of a potential alarming rise in air pollution, as mentioned by my honourable friend, but not properly addressed or answered, are being addressed properly and seriously for East Kent?
Yes, no, I completely understand. One of the reasons why I hope that the Honourable Lady will be able to join other Kent MPs in a meeting is to provide her with reassurance on that front.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, point of order, Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. You will recall the urgent question that Mr Speaker kindly granted the Honourable Member for West Worthing last week. So I regret to inform you, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Bahrain's highest court today has, via Instagram, announced confirmation of the death sentences against Mohammed Ramadan and Hussein Musa, who were tortured. This is obviously utterly unacceptable, and the risk that these sentences are carried out is imminent, and not least given the UK's direct support for the agencies implicated in their torture and forced confessions, and the Minister saying he would speak publicly and loudly if the death sentences were confirmed today. Have you had any notice, Madam Deputy Speaker, of a statement from the Foreign Office on what they now plan to do, including raising this at the highest levels, including with the King, to urge clemency?
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for giving me notice of this point of order about a clearly very distressing matter. I have not received notice of an oral statement on it, but I'm sure that both his request and his plea for action will have been heard by ministers and the Treasury bench and will be passed back to appropriate ministers. Thank you. 3-minute suspension.